The gunshot pierced the evening stillness, sending a flock of startled birds into the crimson Wyoming sky as Maeve Blackwood ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. The year was 1875, and she had just made the worst mistake of her 22 years, trusting a man who'd promised her safe passage to Laramie. "You can't hide forever, Maeve!" The driver's voice carried through the gathering dusk, slurred with whiskey and menace. "Ain't nobody for miles who'll hear you scream!" Maeve's fingers closed around a jagged rock as she peered through a crack in the weathered wood. 3 months ago, she'd left Boston with nothing but a carpetbag of clothes and her late father's pocket watch, determined to claim the land he'd purchased before his death. Now she was stranded in the wilderness, miles from civilization, with a drunken wagon driver who'd revealed his true intentions once they were far from town. "I'm giving you to the count of 10, then I'm coming to get you," he shouted, firing another wild shot that splintered wood near her head. Maeve closed her eyes, calculating her odds. She could run, but where? The nearest settlement was at least a day's ride, and night was falling. The prairie at night held its own dangers: wolves, coyotes, and the bitter cold that descended without warning. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. More trouble, or salvation? She gripped her rock tighter, preparing to fight for her life if necessary. The hoofbeats slowed, followed by the metallic click of a rifle being cocked. "I suggest you drop that gun before I put a hole through you big enough for the wind to whistle through," came the deep, steady voice. Maeve dared to peer over the wagon edge. A tall figure sat astride a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, rifle aimed steadily at her attacker. "This ain't your business, mister," the driver slurred, though Maeve noticed how his gun hand trembled. "You making threats to a lady became my business the moment I rode into hearing distance," the stranger replied, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Now drop the gun and back away." For a tense moment, Maeve thought the driver might fire. Then, cursing, he tossed his revolver to the ground and raised his hands. "She's all yours anyway," he spat. "Uppity Boston girl with more pride than sense." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his rifle trained on the driver. "Get on your horse and ride. Don't stop until you hit the next town, and if I ever see your face again, I won't be so generous." When the driver had disappeared into the gathering darkness, the stranger finally turned toward Maeve's hiding place. "You can come out now, madam. He's gone." Maeve emerged cautiously, still clutching her rock. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer storm. Not handsome in the conventional way of Boston gentlemen, but striking a face carved from the same rugged elements as the land around them. "Xander Caldwell," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Xander." "Maeve Blackwood," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I appreciate your intervention, Mr. Caldwell. Just Xander is fine." His eyes took in her torn dress, the carpetbag partially spilled beside the wagon, and the broken wheel that had stranded them in the first place. "You're a long way from Boston, Miss Blackwood." "I was headed to Laramie," she explained, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was alone with a stranger as night fell across the wilderness. "My father purchased land there before he passed. I've come to claim it." Xander raised an eyebrow. "Alone?" "I had little choice in the matter," she replied stiffly. "And clearly, I should have been more discerning in my choice of guide." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Clearly." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Night's coming on fast, and these parts get dangerous after dark. My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here. I can offer you shelter for the night, and tomorrow I'll see you safely to Laramie." Maeve hesitated. Trading one strange man for another hardly seemed wise, but she had few options. The night air already carried a chill, and she had no supplies, no transportation, and no weapon beyond her pathetic rock. "I can pay you for your trouble," she offered, reaching for her father's watch. Xander shook his head. "Keep your valuables, Miss Blackwood. Out here, Helping a stranger in need isn't charity, it's survival. One day you might be the one offering the helping hand. He gathered her scattered belongings, securing them to his saddle, then offered his hand. Can you ride? I've had some experience, she admitted, thinking of the gentle Maras at her aunt's country estate, nothing like the powerful stallion before her. Good enough. You'll ride with me. Midnight here can handle us both. Before she could protest, he had lifted her onto the saddle and swung up behind her. The intimacy of the position, his chest against her back, his arms encircling her to hold the reins, made her stiffen. Relax, Miss Blackwood, he said, his breath warm against her ear. I promise to deliver you to Laramie intact and unmolested. I'm not the type to take advantage of a lady in distress. As they rode into the gathering darkness, Maeve found herself wondering if she'd made another terrible mistake. But something about Xander Caldwell's quiet confidence reassured her. In a land where a person's word was their bond, she sensed he was a man who kept his promises. What she couldn't know was how thoroughly this chance encounter would change both their lives, or that the journey to Laramie would be only the beginning of a far more challenging path. The moon was high by the time they approached Xander's ranch. Maeve had spent the ride alternating between rigid alertness and exhausted slumping against his chest. When the outline of buildings appeared against the starlit sky, she nearly wept with relief. Welcome to Whispering Pines, Xander said as they rode through a wooden archway. It's not much, but it's home. In the moonlight, Maeve could make out a solid log cabin with a wide porch, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. As they approached, a door opened, spilling warm lamplight across the yard. That you, Xander? Called a voice. It's me, Floyd. And we have a guest. An older man with a silver beard stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. His eyes widened at the sight of Maeve. Well, I'll be, he murmured, lowering his weapon. You didn't mention you were bringing home a lady. Wasn't planned, Xander replied, dismounting before reaching up to help Maeve down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, stiff from the long ride. Xander's hand steadied her elbow. Miss Blackwood was in some trouble on the North Trail. She'll be staying the night. Floyd nodded, taking in Maeve's disheveled appearance with kind eyes. I'll ready the spare room. The missus left some clothes behind when she passed, might find something that fits the lady. Thank you, Maeve said, touched by the simple kindness. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable, rustic but clean, with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books. Maeve noticed small feminine touches that seemed at odds with the bachelor household curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on a rocking chair. My sister visits sometimes, Xander explained, catching her gaze. Tries to civilize me, though it never quite takes. Floyd returned with a bundle of clothing and showed Maeve to a small bedroom. The luxury of privacy, clean clothes, and a real bed after her ordeal nearly overwhelmed her. When she emerged later in a simple cotton dress that hung slightly loose on her frame, she found Xander at the kitchen table, a steaming bowl of stew before him and another waiting for her. Eat, he said simply. You'll need your strength. The stew was hearty and flavorful, filled with chunks of venison and root vegetables. Maeve hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. They ate in companionable silence until she finally spoke. You mentioned a missus. Was she Floyd's wife? Xander shook his head. Mine. Caroline. She passed 3 years ago. Fever took her and our unborn child. Maeve's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have, it's all right, he said. Floyd keeps her things. Says someday I might want them again, for someone else. His expression suggested he found the idea unlikely. And your parents? She asked, changing the subject. Father was killed at Antietam. Mother remarried and moved east with my sister. I stayed to build the ranch. He took a drink of coffee. Your turn, Miss Blackwood. What brings a Boston lady to Wyoming territory alone? Maeve set down her spoon. My father was Jonathan Blackwood. He purchased land near Laramie years ago, intending to start a new life out west after my mother died. But before we could leave, he had a stroke. I cared for him until he passed 6 months ago. And now you've come to claim his land? Yes. There's nothing left for me in Boston, no family, no prospects. My father's creditors took everything except what little I could carry and the deed to the Wyoming property. Xander studied her for a long moment. Forgive my bluntness, but frontier life isn't easy, especially for a woman alone. Have you considered what you'll do once you reach your land? Maeve lifted her chin. I plan to build a home and make a life for myself. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Caldwell. I don't doubt your strength, Miss Blackwood. But strength alone won't build a cabin or plant fields or keep predators both animal and human at bay. Then I'll hire help, she said firmly. Or learn what I need to know. I didn't travel 2,000 miles to surrender at the first obstacle. The hint of a smile returned to his face. I believe you mean that. He stood, collecting their empty bowls. We'll leave at first light. Laramie's a full day's ride from here. Thank you again for your kindness, Maeve said, rising as well. I won't forget it. That night, lying in a stranger's bed in a strange land, Maeve stared at the rough-hewn ceiling and wondered what her father would think of her situation. Jonathan Blackwood had always believed in her resilience, even when others saw only a delicate young woman fit for drawing rooms and garden parties. You're like the willow, Maeve, he'd once told her. You bend, but you don't break. She would need that resilience in the days ahead. As sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of wide open spaces and a pair of storm-gray eyes watching her from the shadows. The journey to Laramie the next day was long but uneventful. Xander proved to be a quiet traveling companion, speaking only when necessary, yet Maeve found his silence oddly comforting. Unlike the constant chatter of Boston society, or the leering comments of her previous guide, Xander's reserve felt respectful rather than dismissive. By late afternoon, the town of Laramie appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the railroad tracks, with mountains rising in the distance. Compared to Boston, it seemed hardly more than a village, yet Maeve felt a flutter of excitement. This was to be her new beginning. Where's this land of yours located? Xander asked as they rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Maeve pulled the deed from her bag. It says Pine Creek Valley, 10 miles northwest of Laramie. Xander's expression changed subtly. Pine Creek? You know it? I know it, he said, his voice carefully neutral. We should check in with the land office first, make sure everything's in order. The land office was a small building near the courthouse, presided over by a bespectacled clerk who peered at Maeve's deed with obvious surprise. The Blackwood claim? Madam, this land was sold at auction for back taxes nearly 2 years ago. Maeve felt as though she'd been struck. That's impossible. My father paid taxes on this land until his death 6 months ago. I have the receipts. She fumbled in her bag, producing a stack of carefully preserved papers. The clerk examined them, frowning. These appear to be in order, but... He consulted a ledger. According to our records, no payments were received for 1873 or 1874. Notices were sent, and when no response came, the land was auctioned as per territorial law. There must be some mistake, Maeve insisted, her voice rising. Who purchased the land? The clerk adjusted his spectacles. The buyer was the Western Pacific Development Company. Reynolds, Xander muttered under his breath. I beg your pardon? Maeve turned to him. Maxwell Reynolds. He owns Western Pacific. Been buying up land all over the territory, especially around Pine Creek. Can I contest this sale? Maeve asked the clerk. If I can prove the taxes were paid, you need to file a formal dispute with the territorial court. The clerk replied, looking uncomfortable. But I should warn you, Miss Blackwood, Western Pacific has considerable influence, and the burden of proof would be on you. Maeve's mind raced. Her entire future had just collapsed. She had no money for a lengthy legal battle, No place to stay, and no prospects in this unfamiliar town. Thank you for your time, she said stiffly, gathering her papers. Outside, she managed to maintain her composure until they reached Xander's horse, then sagged against the hitching post. I've come all this way for nothing, she whispered. Xander's expression was grim. This isn't right. Reynolds has been pulling these tricks for years, manipulating records, losing tax payments, intimidating smaller landowners. But he's usually careful to target people who can't fight back. Like a woman alone, far from home? Maeve's laugh was bitter. He chose well then. What will you do now? It was the question she'd been dreading. I don't know. I have very little money left. Perhaps there's work in town. Xander was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Come back to Whispering Pines with me. Maeve stared at him. I beg your pardon? I need help around the ranch. Floyd's getting on in years, and I've been meaning to hire someone. You need a place to stay while you figure things out. It's a fair exchange. You want to hire me? As what, a housekeeper? As whatever you're capable of being, he replied. You said you're stronger than you look. Here's your chance to prove it. Maeve hesitated. The offer was unexpected, possibly inappropriate, and yet, what choice did she have? Return east in defeat? Become a saloon girl or a laundress, scraping by on pennies? Why would you do this for a stranger? She asked, searching his face for hidden motives. Because I've seen what Reynolds does to people who stand in his way, Xander said simply. And because out here, we look after our own. I'm not your own, Maeve pointed out. You became my concern when I found you in trouble on my land, he countered. I don't leave things unfinished, Miss Blackwood. Maeve considered her options, limited as they were. If I accept, I want to be clear that this is a business arrangement. I'll work for my keep, nothing more. Understood. Xander's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. We can stop at the general store for whatever supplies you need, then head back before dark. And so Maeve Blackwood, who had arrived in Laramie with dreams of independence and her own land, found herself returning to Whispering Pines Ranch as a hired hand dependent on the goodwill of a man she barely knew, in a territory that had already proven more dangerous and unpredictable than she had imagined. What she didn't realize was that her arrival at the ranch would set in motion events that would challenge not only her future but Xander's as well, drawing them both into a conflict that had been brewing in Wyoming territory long before either of them had set foot on its soil. Life at Whispering Pines settled into an unexpected rhythm. Maeve had never shied away from hard work. Caring for her father during his long illness had taught her endurance, but ranch life demanded different skills. Each morning, she rose before dawn to help Floyd prepare breakfast for the handful of ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. Afterward, there were chickens to feed, eggs to collect, a kitchen garden to tend, and endless mending and cleaning. Xander had been true to his word about treating her as an employee rather than a charity case. He was fair but demanding, expecting her to pull her weight like anyone else on the ranch. At first, the men had been skeptical of the Boston lady, watching with barely concealed amusement as she struggled with unfamiliar tasks. But Maeve's determination gradually earned their respect. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Maeve was hanging laundry when she noticed Xander by the corral, working with a spirited young mare. She paused to watch as he moved with the animal, his voice too low for her to hear but clearly having a calming effect on the nervous horse. He has a way with the difficult ones, Floyd said, coming to stand beside her. Always has. The horses, you mean? Floyd chuckled. Horses, people, situations. Xander's got a knack for handling what others can't. Maeve pinned a shirt to the line. He doesn't seem to have much patience for weakness. Don't mistake his expectations for lack of compassion, Floyd advised. The man rode 15 miles in a blizzard last winter to help birth the widow Jenkins' calf. Stayed 3 days until he was sure they'd make it. Before Maeve could respond, a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. Xander left the corral to meet him, and from their gestures, The conversation appeared intense. After the writer departed, Xander strode toward the house, his expression dark. Reynolds' men have been asking questions in town about the Boston woman staying at Whispering Pines, he announced when he reached them. Seems our visit to the land office didn't go unnoticed. Maeve felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Why would he care about me? I don't know, Xander admitted. But Reynolds doesn't waste time on people unless they're either useful to him or standing in his way. I'm neither, Maeve said. I have no claim to fight him with, no power or influence. Maybe he doesn't know that, Floyd suggested. Or maybe there's something about that land you don't know. Xander nodded slowly. Pine Creek Valley would complete Reynolds' hold on the watershed. He's been buying up water rights all through the territory. With control of Pine Creek, he could dictate terms to half the ranchers in the county. My father never mentioned anything special about the land, Maeve said, trying to recall his rare comments about the western property. He only said it was beautiful country, good for raising cattle. We should ride out there, Xander decided. See what Reynolds is so interested in. The next morning, they set out at first light. Xander, Maeve, and 2 ranch hands named Cooper and Liam. Maeve had been given a gentle mare named Willow to ride, and though she was still getting accustomed to western saddles, she managed to keep pace with the others. The ride to Pine Creek Valley took them through stunning country rolling grasslands that gave way to pine-covered slopes, with distant mountains framing the horizon. When they crested a final ridge, Maeve caught her breath at the view below, a verdant valley bisected by a winding creek, surrounded by forested hills. That's it, Xander said, reining in beside her. Blackwood land, or what should have been. Maeve felt a pang of loss. The valley was everything her father had described, a perfect place for the fresh start he dreamed of for them. It's beautiful, she whispered. And valuable, Xander added. That creek runs year-round, even in drought years. Perfect for cattle, crops, or controlling your neighbors. They rode down into the valley, finding it surprisingly undeveloped given its apparent value. A small, abandoned cabin stood near the creek, probably built by an earlier settler, but otherwise, the land remained wild. This is odd, Cooper said as they explored. Reynolds usually starts building or mining as soon as he acquires property. Why leave this untouched? Unless he's waiting for something, Xander mused, dismounting to examine the soil near the creek. Maeve wandered toward the cabin, curious about who might have lived there before. The door hung crookedly on leather hinges, and inside was a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and the remains of a rope bed. Dust covered everything, yet something about the humble space touched her, perhaps because it represented the kind of simple beginning she had envisioned for herself. A glint of metal caught her eye. Beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace, something reflected the light streaming through a window. Kneeling, Maeve pried up the board and found a small tin box. Inside were papers, land surveys, maps, and letters yellowed with age but still legible. Xander, she called. I've found something. He appeared in the doorway, blocking the light. What is it? I'm not sure, Maeve admitted, spreading the papers on the dusty table. Land documents, I think. And letters. One map in particular caught Xander's attention. This is a geological survey, he said, studying it closely. Dated 1868. Look here. He pointed to markings along the creek. These symbols indicate mineral deposits. Gold? Maeve asked, remembering stories of western gold rushes. Coal, more likely. There are seams throughout these mountains. If there's a significant deposit under this valley. He didn't need to finish the thought. Coal meant railways, industry, power, and immense profit for whoever controlled it. Would my father have known about this? Xander shrugged. Hard to say. This survey was done after the war, when the territory was just opening up. Your father might have purchased the land sight unseen, based on reports of good grazing. Maeve examined one of the letters, correspondence between a government surveyor and someone in Washington. It says here they were keeping the findings confidential until the territory could implement proper mineral rights laws. Which means Reynolds shouldn't have known either, Xander said grimly. Unless he has friends in high places. Or paid for information, Cooper added from the doorway. The implications were clear. If Reynolds had learned about potential coal deposits through improper channels, then engineered the seizure of Blackwood land for back taxes. This could explain why he's interested in you, Xander told Maeve. If you contest the sale with evidence of fraud, I could reclaim my father's land, she finished, hope rising for the first time since the devastating visit to the land office. And expose whatever underhanded methods Reynolds used to get it, Xander agreed. Which would threaten not just this property, but potentially his entire operation. As they gathered the documents to take back to the ranch, Maeve felt a strange mixture of emotions: vindication that her journey hadn't been in vain after all, determination to fight for what was rightfully hers, and fear of the powerful enemy she had unwittingly made. We should leave, Liam warned, scanning the ridgeline. If Reynolds has been watching this place. Xander nodded. Pack up those papers. We'll take a different route back, just to be safe. As they rode away from Pine Creek Valley, Maeve looked back at the land that should have been her new beginning. One way or another, she vowed, she would return not as a visitor, but as the rightful owner of her father's legacy. What she couldn't know was how high the price of that claim would be, or how deeply her fate had already become intertwined with Xander Caldwell's. The following days were a flurry of activity. Xander sent Cooper to Cheyenne to consult a lawyer he trusted, while Maeve and Floyd pored over the documents found in the cabin, looking for anything that might strengthen her case against Reynolds. The tax receipts are our strongest evidence, Maeve said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before them. They prove my father paid what he owed. If the payments never reached the land office, then someone intercepted them, Xander finished. The question is, can we prove it was Reynolds or someone working for him? Floyd tapped one of the letters. This might help. The surveyor mentions sending his findings to both the Department of Interior and the Territorial Governor's Office. If those records still exist, they'll confirm the coal deposits, Maeve said excitedly. Which gives Reynolds a motive. Xander looked less convinced. Motive isn't proof. Reynolds is careful. He operates through layers of companies and hired men. Connecting him directly to any wrongdoing won't be easy. A commotion outside interrupted their discussion. Xander moved to the window, hand dropping instinctively to the revolver at his hip. Riders coming in. 6, maybe 7 of them. Ranch hands? Maeve asked, gathering the papers quickly. No. Our boys are all accounted for. His expression hardened. Floyd, take Miss Blackwood to the root cellar. Stay there until I come for you. I'm not hiding, Maeve began, but Xander cut her off. This isn't a debate. Reynolds doesn't know what evidence we have, and I intend to keep it that way. His eyes met hers, intense and unyielding. Please, Maeve. It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in his tone made her relent. She followed Floyd through the kitchen to a trapdoor that led to the cool darkness below. Xander can handle himself, Floyd assured her as they descended. Been doing it since he was 16. In the cellar, with only a small lantern for light, Maeve strained to hear what was happening above. Muffled voices, the creak of boots on the porch, then silence. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before the trapdoor finally opened, revealing Xander's face, grim in the lantern light. They're gone, he said, offering a hand to help them up. For now. Reynolds' men? Maeve asked, brushing dirt from her skirt. His foreman, Marcus Sloane, and some hired guns. Xander's jaw tightened. They claimed they were looking for a stray bull, but it was obvious they were sizing up the ranch. Sloane made a point of mentioning how dry the season's been, how easy it would be for a fire to start. Threatening you, Maeve said, horrified. Because of me. Not because of you, Xander corrected. Because of Reynolds and whatever he's hiding. This is just his opening move. What do we do now? We continue gathering evidence for your case, he said firmly. But we also prepare for trouble. Reynolds won't stop at threats. That night, Maeve found sleep elusive. The encounter with Reynolds' men had made the danger real in a way it hadn't been before. She had come west seeking independence, a chance to build a life on her own terms. Instead, she had entangled herself and worse, Xander and his people in a conflict with a powerful, unscrupulous man. Rising from her bed, she moved to the window. The ranch was quiet under a canopy of stars, with only a single lamp burning in the bunkhouse where the men took turns standing watch. As she gazed out, a figure emerged from the shadows, Xander, making his own rounds, rifle cradled in his arm. Something about his solitary vigilance touched her deeply. He had no obligation to fight her battles, to risk his ranch and his people for a woman he barely knew. Yet here he was, standing guard while she worried by the window. When Cooper returned from Cheyenne 3 days later, the news was mixed. The lawyer believed Maeve had a strong case for reclaiming her land, especially with the tax receipts as evidence. However, fighting Reynolds would be costly and time-consuming, with no guarantee of success given his influence with territorial officials. There's more, Cooper added as they gathered in the kitchen. While I was in town, I heard rumors about Reynolds' plans for Pine Creek. He's not just after the coal, he's negotiating with the railroad to build a spur line through the valley. If that happens, the value of that land will multiply tenfold. Which means he'll fight even harder to keep it, Xander concluded. And he's not waiting idly, Cooper continued. He's been hiring more men, rough types, gunmen mostly. Word is he's preparing to start operations in Pine Creek, regardless of any legal challenges. Maeve felt her hopes sinking. So even if I win in court eventually, he could strip the land of its resources before I ever take possession. Not if we can delay him, Xander said, his mind clearly working on the problem. The lawyer in Cheyenne, could he get an injunction preventing any development of the land while ownership is in dispute? Cooper nodded. Possibly. But we need to file the case immediately. Then that's what we'll do, Xander decided. Maeve and I will ride to Cheyenne tomorrow. The rest of you keep the ranch running and stay alert. Reynolds may try something while we're gone. That evening, as Maeve packed for the journey, she confronted the question that had been nagging at her since the threat to the ranch had become clear. Why are you doing this? She asked when she found Xander alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. This fight with Reynolds, it's my battle, not yours. Xander was silent for a long moment. Reynolds has been pushing smaller ranchers out for years, he finally said. Taking their water, their grazing rights, buying up land at rigged auctions. My father saw it starting before the war, warned me about men like him. So this is about principle? Standing against a bully? He turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. Partly. But it's also about you. The simple statement hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. I'm not worth risking everything you've built, Maeve said quietly. That's not for you to decide. His voice was gentle but firm. You came west to claim what's yours, to build a life on your own terms. I respect that kind of courage. It doesn't feel like courage now, she admitted. It feels like foolishness that's endangering people I care about. The last words slipped out before she could stop them. Xander's eyes met hers, and for a breathless moment, something electric passed between them. Maeve, he began, then stopped as Floyd appeared in the doorway. Rider coming, the older man announced. Just one, moving fast. The moment broken, Xander moved to the edge of the porch, hand on his revolver as he peered into the gathering dusk. As the rider drew closer, his posture relaxed slightly. It's Liam, he said. The young ranch hand practically fell from his horse, exhausted and dust-covered. Reynolds' men, he gasped as Xander steadied him. They've moved into Pine Creek. Started clearing land for construction. At least 20 of them, armed to the teeth. So much for legal channels, Xander muttered. He's forcing our hand. What can we do? Maeve asked. We can't fight 20 armed men. No, Xander agreed. But we can still get that injunction. If the federal marshal enforces it, Reynolds is already ignoring the law, Floyd pointed out. What makes you think he'll respect an injunction? Because ignoring a federal marshal is a different level of defiance, Xander explained. Reynolds operates in the gray areas: bribes, threats, manipulating the system. Open rebellion against federal authority would cost him his political connections, his railroad contracts, everything. Maeve considered this. So we still go to Cheyenne? Yes, but we need to move faster than planned. If Reynolds has already started development, every day counts. Xander turned to Floyd. Get provisions ready. We leave at first light. As preparations for the journey continued, Maeve found herself drawn back to the porch, staring in the direction of Pine Creek, her land, being violated even now by Reynolds and his men. Anger rose in her chest, surprising in its intensity. All her life, she had been taught to be accommodating, to seek compromise rather than conflict. But some things, she was learning, were worth fighting for. She didn't hear Xander approach until he spoke. We'll stop him, Maeve. She turned, finding him closer than expected, his presence solid and reassuring in the darkness. I believe you, she said, and realized she meant it. In the weeks she had known him, Xander Caldwell had proven himself a man of his word, steadfast and determined. You should get some rest, he advised. Tomorrow will be a long day. Maeve nodded but made no move to leave. Before, when Floyd interrupted us. What were you going to say? Xander's gaze held hers for a moment before shifting to the distant horizon. That you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. And that some risks are worth taking. The words seemed to carry a double meaning, one that made Maeve's heart beat faster. But before she could respond, he had turned away, heading toward the bunkhouse to finalize preparations for their journey. Left alone on the porch, Maeve wondered if she had imagined the undercurrent of emotion in his voice, or if the taciturn rancher was beginning to feel the same inexplicable connection that had been growing in her own heart, a connection she had neither expected nor sought, but which had taken root nonetheless during her time at Whispering Pines. The journey to Cheyenne was arduous, made more so by their need for haste. They rode hard through rough country, avoiding the main trails where Reynolds' men might be watching. Xander set a punishing pace, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the horses or snatch a few hours of sleep. Maeve, determined not to slow them down, endured the discomfort without complaint. By the second day, every muscle in her body protested, and she could feel blisters forming where her riding boots chafed. Yet there was a certain exhilaration in the challenge, in pushing beyond what she had believed herself capable of. We'll reach Cheyenne by nightfall, Xander told her during a brief stop to water the horses at a small creek. The lawyer Cooper spoke with James Thornton is expecting us. Maeve nodded, splashing cool water on her face. And if we get the injunction? A federal marshal will be assigned to enforce it. Could take a few days. He studied her with concern. How are you holding up? I'll manage, she assured him, though she couldn't quite hide her wince as she straightened. Xander's expression softened. You've impressed me, Maeve Blackwood. Most people I know, men included, would have complained half as much ground. The simple praise warmed her more than it should have. I told you I'm stronger than I look. So you did. His gaze lingered on her face for a moment before he turned back to his horse. We should keep moving. They reached Cheyenne as darkness fell, the territorial capital considerably larger and more developed than Laramie. Gas lamps illuminated the main streets, and brick buildings stood alongside wooden structures, giving the city a more established feel. Thornton's law office was closed for the night, but the lawyer himself answered their knock at his residence, a distinguished man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. Mr. Caldwell, Miss Blackwood, he greeted them, ushering them inside. Cooper explained your situation. I've already begun drafting the necessary papers. Over a late supper provided by Thornton's housekeeper, they discussed strategy. The lawyer was cautiously optimistic about their chances of securing an injunction, especially with the tax receipts and survey documents as evidence. The judge I have in mind, Judge Hammond, is known for his integrity, Thornton explained. He's no friend to corporate interests that bend the law. If we can see him first thing tomorrow, we might have your injunction by afternoon. And a marshal to enforce it? Xander pressed. That's where things get complicated, Thornton admitted. The marshals are stretched thin. It could be several days before one is available to ride to Pine Creek. Days we don't have, Maeve said, thinking of Reynolds' men already at work on her land. There may be another option, Thornton said thoughtfully. If Judge Hammond is sufficiently convinced of the urgency, he might empower Mr. Caldwell to deliver the injunction as a designated representative of the court. Not ideal, but legal. Xander nodded slowly. Reynolds' men would be less likely to shoot a federal representative than me alone. Less likely, but not impossible, Thornton cautioned. Reynolds is gambling a great deal on this venture. Men who stand to lose fortunes can be unpredictable. Later, settled in the guest room Thornton had provided, Maeve found herself too anxious to sleep. The possibility of reclaiming her land seemed tantalizingly close, yet fraught with new dangers. If Xander delivered the injunction and Reynolds' men resisted. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Xander in the hallway, looking as restless as she felt. I saw the light under your door, he explained. Thought you might still be awake. Too much on my mind, she admitted, stepping back to let him enter. He remained in the doorway, mindful of propriety even in these unusual circumstances. Thornton thinks we have a strong case. By this time tomorrow, you could legally halt Reynolds' operations. If the judge agrees. If you can deliver the injunction safely. If Reynolds' men comply. Maeve sighed. So many ifs. That's the West for you, Xander said with a hint of a smile. Nothing's certain except the sky above and the ground below. And even the ground can be claimed, stolen, or disputed, she added wryly. His smile faded. Maeve, if we get this injunction. You should know that stopping Reynolds temporarily is just the beginning. He won't give up easily. I know, she said quietly. But neither will I. No, I don't suppose you will. His eyes held a mixture of admiration and something deeper, more personal. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I. He hesitated, then continued more formally. I'm proud to stand with you in this fight. Maeve sensed he had been about to say something else, something the proper Xander Caldwell wasn't quite ready to voice. Thank you, she replied simply. For everything. After he had gone, Maeve stood by the window, watching the quiet street below. Boston seemed a lifetime away now, as did the sheltered young woman who had boarded a train west with nothing but hope and a deed. That woman could never have imagined standing against a man like Reynolds, or finding an unexpected ally in a Wyoming rancher with storm-gray eyes and a steadfast heart. Whatever tomorrow brought, she knew with certainty that she had changed not just her circumstances, but herself. And that transformation, painful though it had been at times, was something she would never regret. Judge Hammond proved to be everything Thornton had promised, a stern, principled man who listened carefully to their case the next morning, examined the evidence, and rendered his decision without hesitation. The injunction is granted, he announced from behind his imposing desk. All development activities on the disputed Blackwood property must cease immediately pending resolution of ownership claims. Maeve felt a surge of vindication. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge nodded, then turned to Thornton. You mentioned the need for immediate enforcement. What's the status of available marshals? That's the difficulty, Your Honor, Thornton replied. Marshal Davis and his deputies are currently escorting a prisoner transport to Denver. They aren't expected back for at least 4 days. Hammond frowned. And you believe the respondent will continue development in defiance of this order if not immediately served? Based on his past actions, yes, Xander confirmed. Reynolds has already placed armed men on the property and begun clearing operations. The judge considered this, his expression grave. Very well. Under the circumstances, I am empowering Mr. Caldwell as a temporary officer of the court for the sole purpose of delivering and enforcing this injunction. He fixed Xander with a stern gaze. This does not authorize you to engage in armed conflict, Mr. Caldwell. You are to serve the papers, inform the respondent of the legal consequences of non-compliance, and report back. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Your Honor. Xander agreed, though Maeve detected a reservation in his tone. Within hours, they were riding north again, the precious injunction secured in Xander's saddlebag. Thornton had provided them with official documentation of Xander's temporary court status, including a letter bearing Judge Hammond's seal. Will it be enough? Maeve asked as they left Cheyenne behind. Just papers and seals? It should be, Xander said. Reynolds is ambitious, not stupid. Openly defying a federal court order would destroy everything he's built. Unless he believes the potential profit outweighs the risk. Xander glanced at her. You're starting to think like a Westerner, Maeve. Always calculating the odds. Is that a compliment or a concern? She asked with a hint of a smile. Both, maybe. His expression grew serious again. When we reach Pine Creek, I want you to stay back while I deliver the injunction. If things go wrong, I'm coming with you. Maeve interrupted firmly. It's my land, my fight. I won't hide while you face the danger alone. Xander looked as though he wanted to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but there was a reluctant admiration in his voice. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove, pushing on despite the darkness as long as they dared before stopping. As they sat by a small, carefully banked fire, Maeve found herself studying Xander's profile, illuminated by the flickering flames. Tell me about Caroline, she said suddenly. Xander looked up, startled. What? Your wife. You never speak of her, except that one time when you mentioned how she died. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then he sighed, poking at the fire with a stick. Caroline was gentle, kind. She loved books and music. Tried to bring some civilization to our rough life. A faint smile touched his lips. She used to read poetry aloud in the evenings, said it kept her connected to the world beyond our valley. You loved her very much, Maeve observed softly. Yes. His voice was low, tinged with old grief. When she died, I thought that part of me died too. The part that could connect to another person that way. The admission hung in the night air between them, more revealing than anything he had said before. Maeve felt a strange ache in her chest, sympathy for his loss, but also something more personal, a longing she had no right to feel. And now? She asked, barely above a whisper. Xander's eyes met hers across the fire, their gray depths reflecting the flames. Now I'm not so sure. After a moment, he added, What about you? No suitors back in Boston? Maeve shook her head. My father's illness kept me occupied for years. By the time he passed, I was already considered past my prime for marriage prospects. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. 22 and practically on the shelf, at least in Boston society. Boston society sounds foolish, Xander commented. Out here, a woman is valued for her strength, her resilience, her heart. His gaze held hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary before he looked away. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. As they prepared their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Maeve reflected on the conversation. Something had shifted between them tonight, a wall lowered, if not entirely removed. Whatever happened at Pine Creek tomorrow, she sensed that her relationship with Xander Caldwell had already changed irrevocably. They reached Pine Creek Valley the following afternoon, approaching cautiously from the ridge where they had first viewed the property. The scene below confirmed their worst fears. A camp had been established near the old cabin, with tents, wagons, and the beginnings of more permanent structures. Men moved about purposefully, some clearing land, others unloading equipment from wagons. At least 20 men, Xander observed grimly. And they're moving fast. Is Reynolds there? Maeve asked, scanning the activity. The man by the large tent, giving orders, that's Marcus Sloane, his foreman. Xander pointed to a tall figure with a distinctive red beard. Reynolds usually lets Sloane handle the dirty work. They watched for several minutes, assessing the situation. Finally, Xander turned to Maeve. We'll ride down together, but stay slightly behind me. If anything happens, your priority is to get away, understand? Head back to Whispering Pines. Maeve wanted to protest but recognized the wisdom in his caution. I understand. As they rode openly down into the valley, activity in the camp gradually ceased. Men stopped working to watch their approach, some reaching instinctively for weapons. By the time they reached the center of the camp, they were surrounded by wary, hostile faces. Sloane stepped forward, hand resting on his holstered pistol. Caldwell. You're trespassing on Western Pacific property. Actually, I'm here on official business, Xander replied calmly, reaching slowly into his saddlebag to retrieve the injunction. By order of Judge Hammond of the Territorial Court, all development activities on this property must cease immediately pending resolution of ownership claims. He handed the document to Sloane, who barely glanced at it before sneering. Court orders don't mean much out here, Caldwell. You know that. This one does, Xander said evenly. I've been empowered as a temporary officer of the court to deliver and enforce it. Continued development would constitute contempt of court, a federal offense. Murmurs ran through the gathered men. Sloane's confidence seemed to waver slightly as he examined the papers more carefully. Miss Blackwood has substantial evidence that her father's tax payments were deliberately misdirected, Xander continued, his voice carrying to all present. When the court reviews that evidence, this land will be returned to its rightful owner. Anyone participating in illegal development could face charges. Several workers exchanged uneasy glances. Legal troubles were not what they had signed on for. This is a delaying tactic, nothing more, Sloane declared, though with less conviction than before. Mr. Reynolds has clear title to this property. Then he can present his case in court. Maeve spoke up, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But until then, his men need to leave my father's land. A tense silence followed. Maeve could feel the balance shifting. Some of the men looked uncomfortable, while others seemed ready for confrontation regardless of legal consequences. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. All heads turned as a group of riders crested the ridge. Floyd, Cooper, Liam, and several other Whispering Pines ranch hands, all armed. Thought you might appreciate some company, Floyd called as they rode down to join Xander and Maeve. The arrival changed the dynamics instantly. What had been an overwhelming force against two individuals now looked more like an even match, especially when the Whispering Pines men positioned themselves strategically around the camp. Sloane's face darkened with anger, but calculation replaced his earlier dismissiveness. We'll need to consult with Mr. Reynolds about this. Legal development, he said finally. In the meantime, we'll suspend operations. All your men need to leave the property, Xander insisted. The injunction is clear. We'll leave a few men to secure our equipment, Sloane countered. Unless you plan to start shooting over a piece of paper? It was a test, and everyone knew it. The injunction gave Xander authority to enforce its terms, but not to initiate violence that could escalate into bloodshed. 3 men unarmed to watch your equipment, Xander conceded after a moment. The rest clear out by sundown. And be clear with Reynolds, any attempt to resume work will result in federal marshals being dispatched from Cheyenne. Sloane glared but nodded curtly. 3 men. The rest will go. He turned to his workers. Pack up, boys. We're pulling back for now. As Reynolds' men began grudgingly preparing to depart, Floyd approached Xander and Maeve. Figured you might need reinforcements, he explained. Cooper had a feeling things might get tense. Good instincts, Xander acknowledged with a nod of thanks. We'll need to keep watch until the marshal arrives. Reynolds won't give up this easily. Maeve surveyed the camp, her land, scarred by the beginnings of Reynolds' development, but still largely intact. "We did it," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. "We actually stopped him." "For now," Xander cautioned, though he couldn't quite suppress a smile at the victory. "This is just the first battle in what could be a long war." "But we won it," Maeve insisted, her eyes shining with determination and something more a fierce joy that transformed her face, making her even more beautiful in Xander's eyes. "Yes," he agreed softly, his gaze holding hers. "We did." As the sun began to set over Pine Creek Valley, casting long shadows across the land they had fought for, Maeve felt a profound sense of belonging not just to the property that was her birthright, but to these people who had stood beside her, and especially to the man whose quiet strength had made it all possible. The standoff at Pine Creek marked a turning point, though not the end of their struggle with Reynolds. Over the next few weeks, as promised, a federal marshal arrived to formally enforce the injunction, and Thornton filed Maeve's formal challenge to the tax sale in territorial court. Reynolds responded with legal countermeasures of his own, hiring expensive lawyers from Denver to defend his claim. The case grew more complex as allegations of document tampering and witness intimidation emerged. What had begun as a simple dispute over back taxes was evolving into a significant legal battle that attracted attention throughout the territory. Through it all, Maeve remained at Whispering Pines, her temporary employment evolving into something more permanent and less defined. She still helped with household tasks, but increasingly took on responsibilities around the ranch-keeping accounts, corresponding with Thornton, even learning to help with the livestock under Xander's patient instruction. "You're a natural with the horses," he told her one afternoon as she successfully calmed a nervous colt. "They trust you." "Animals are often better judges of character than people," Maeve replied, stroking the colt's velvety nose. "They see past pretense." "And what do they see in you, I wonder?" Xander asked, his voice softening as it often did now when they were alone. Maeve met his gaze steadily. "Someone trying to find her place in a world very different from the one she was raised for." "And have you found it?" The question seemed to carry more weight than its simple words suggested. Before she could answer, Cooper rode up with news from town. Reynolds had been seen in Laramie, meeting with railroad officials. The moment between them passed, but Maeve found herself reflecting on Xander's question later that night. Had she found her place? The Boston society girl who had arrived in Wyoming seemed like a stranger now, naive, sheltered, defined by others' expectations. The woman she was becoming felt more authentic, more truly herself, even as she navigated challenges her former self could never have imagined. And then there was Xander. Their relationship had evolved in ways neither had anticipated. The initial wariness had given way to mutual respect, then to friendship, and finally to something deeper that remained largely unspoken. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race, only to look away when their eyes met, as though afraid of what she might read in his. One evening in early autumn, with the aspen trees turning gold on the distant slopes, Maeve found Xander on the porch, staring toward Pine Creek with a troubled expression. "What is it?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "Reynolds is getting desperate," he said without preamble. "Word from town is that the railroad is losing patience with the legal delays. They're considering an alternate route that bypasses Pine Creek entirely. Isn't that good news for us? If the railroad loses interest, it means Reynolds has nothing left to lose," Xander explained grimly. "A desperate man is unpredictable." Maeve considered this. "You think he might try something outside the law? I think we need to be prepared for that possibility." He turned to face her fully. "Maeve, I want you to consider something. If your case succeeds and you reclaim Pine Creek, what then?" The question caught her off guard. I suppose I'd build there, as my father planned. Start a small ranch, perhaps." "Alone?" There was an odd tension in his voice. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "When I came west, independence was all I wanted. To prove I could make my own way. And now?" Maeve hesitated, then decided that after all they had been through together, honesty was the only possible course. Now I understand that true strength isn't about standing alone. It's about choosing the right people to stand with. Something shifted in Xander's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Maeve. Once again, they were interrupted this time by the distant sound of galloping hooves. Both turned to see a rider approaching at breakneck speed, silhouetted against the setting sun. That's Liam, Xander said, recognizing the young ranch hand's riding style even at a distance. Something's wrong. By the time Liam reached the house, several other ranch hands had gathered. The young man practically fell from his horse, his face pale with urgency. Fire! He gasped. Pine Creek Reynolds men. Xander gripped his shoulders. Slow down. What about Pine Creek? Liam took a deep breath. I was checking the north boundary when I saw the smoke. Pine Creek Valley is burning. And I saw riders leaving the area. Reynolds men, I'm sure of it. Maeve felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. He's burning my land? But why? If he can't have it, he's destroying its value. Xander finished grimly. If the timber burns and the watershed is damaged, the property becomes nearly worthless to you, to the railroad, to everyone. We have to stop it, Maeve said, already moving toward the barn. Before it spreads. Xander caught her arm. This could be exactly what Reynolds wants to draw us out, away from the ranch. I don't care, she replied fiercely. That land is my father's legacy. I won't let Reynolds destroy it out of spite. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Then Xander nodded sharply. Cooper, you and 3 men stay to guard the ranch. The rest of you, get shovels, axes, anything we can use to fight fire. And bring every water barrel we can transport. Within minutes, they were riding hard toward Pine Creek, the glow of the fire visible against the darkening sky long before they reached the valley. When they crested the ridge, Maeve gasped at the sight below, flames devouring the pine forest on the eastern slope, advancing rapidly toward the creek and the cabin. The winds pushing it downstream. Xander assessed quickly. If we can create a fire break along the creek, we might save the western half of the valley. For hours, they fought the fire with desperate intensity, digging fire breaks, felling trees to create barriers, beating back flames that threatened to jump their defenses. The heat was brutal, the smoke choking, but Maeve worked alongside the men without complaint, her face streaked with soot, her hands blistered from wielding a shovel. Near midnight, when it seemed they might be gaining ground, the wind shifted treacherously, driving flames toward their position. Fall back! Xander shouted as a wall of fire surged toward them. To the creek! In the confusion of smoke and flames, Maeve lost sight of him. She made her way to the creek, where several ranch hands had gathered, but Xander wasn't among them. Where's Xander? She demanded, coughing through the smoke. Floyd looked around, his expression changing to alarm. He was heading toward the cabin, trying to save it. Without hesitation, Maeve turned back toward the burning forest. Maeve, no! Floyd called after her, but she was already running, handkerchief pressed to her face against the smoke. The cabin stood in a small clearing that had thus far been spared the worst of the fire, but flames were approaching from 3 sides. As Maeve reached it, she saw Xander on the roof, desperately dousing flames with water from a bucket. Xander! She screamed over the roar of the fire. He looked up, shock crossing his face. Maeve! Get back to the creek! Not without you! At that moment, a burning pine crashed down near the cabin, sending a shower of embers onto the dry roof. Flames caught instantly, spreading faster than Xander could fight them. He had no choice but to jump, landing heavily beside Maeve. We need to go, now! He shouted, grabbing her hand. But as they turned to flee, they found their path blocked by a wall of fire. The clearing had become a trap, with flames encircling them on all sides. Xander pulled Maeve close, his eyes scanning desperately for an escape route. The creek, he decided. It's our only chance. We'll have to run through the fire to reach it. Maeve nodded, beyond fear now, trusting him completely. Together. Xander shrugged out of his coat, wrapping it around her as best he could. Keep your head down and don't stop, no matter what. Ready? She squeezed his hand in response, and they ran straight toward the narrowest band of flames, into searing heat that seemed to steal the very air from their lungs. For a terrible moment, Maeve thought they wouldn't make it. Then they were through, tumbling down the bank into the blessed coolness of the creek. Xander pulled her into deeper water as burning debris rained down around them. They crouched there, gasping for breath, watching as the cabin, the last remnant of an earlier settler's dreams, was consumed by the relentless flames. I'm sorry, Xander said hoarsely, his arms still protectively around her. The land can heal, Maeve replied, her voice raw from smoke. People matter more. She touched his face, leaving a smudge of soot and water. You matter more. In that moment, with death so recently defied and the world burning around them, pretense became impossible. Xander's eyes, reflecting the surrounding flames, met hers with a naked honesty that matched her own. Maeve, he whispered, her name like a prayer on his lips. Then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him, it hardly mattered which. The kiss tasted of smoke and desperation and something like hope, a promise made in the midst of destruction. When they finally broke apart, breathless for reasons beyond the surrounding smoke, Xander pressed his forehead to hers. I've been fighting this since the day you arrived, he admitted. Trying not to care too much. Why? She asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Because losing someone you love breaks something inside you. Something I wasn't sure could heal. His voice was rough with emotion. But not loving you. That might be worse. Before Maeve could respond, shouts reached them through the roar of the fire. Floyd and the others, calling their names. Reality intruded. They were still in danger, the fire still raged, and Reynolds' sabotage had succeeded in destroying much of what they had fought to protect. Yet as they made their way back to the others, hand in hand through the smoke-filled night, Maeve felt a strange, contradictory sense of victory. Reynolds had meant to break her spirit along with her land. Instead, he had inadvertently revealed what truly mattered, and it wasn't acres or timber or coal seams beneath the earth. It was the man beside her, who had risked everything for her fight, and who now looked at her as though she were more precious than any land or gold ever could be. By morning, the fire had largely burned itself out, helped by a light rain that began just before dawn. The damage was extensive. Most of the eastern forest was gone, and the cabin was nothing but charred timbers. Yet the creek still flowed, and the western slopes remained largely untouched. As they surveyed the blackened landscape in the gray morning light, Maeve felt a complex mixture of grief and determination. It will grow back, she said, more to herself than to the exhausted men around her. It's not destroyed, just changed. Xander, his face streaked with soot and a burn on one forearm from their desperate escape, nodded slowly. Nature has a way of renewing itself. And so do people. Their eyes met, the previous night's revelations still vibrating between them, too new and precious to be discussed in the light of day with others present. Reynolds will pay for this, Floyd declared angrily. Arson is a serious crime, even out here. We'll need proof it was him, Xander cautioned. Liam saw riders, but that's not enough for a court. Maybe this is, Cooper called from near what remained of the cabin. He held up a charred metal canister. Coal oil. Found several of these scattered around. This wasn't a natural fire, it was deliberately set to cause maximum damage. Xander examined the canister. Western Pacific stamps, he noted grimly. Reynolds got careless. Or confident that he's above the law, Maeve suggested. No one's above the law out here, came a new voice. They turned to see a man on horseback approaching from the ridge, middle-aged, with a weathered face and the unmistakable star of a U.S. Marshal on his chest. Marshal Davis, Xander greeted him with surprise. Didn't expect to see you out this way. Judge Hammond sent me to check on that injunction situation, Davis explained, dismounting to survey the destruction. "Looks like I'm a day too late." "Not necessarily," Xander replied. "We have evidence Reynolds' men started this fire deliberately. Coal oil canisters with Western Pacific markings." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "That would constitute criminal destruction of property under dispute, a federal offense, combined with the allegations of tax fraud in Miss Blackwood's case." He turned to Maeve. "Madam, I believe Mr. Reynolds may have just handed you a victory." Over the next few days, events moved with surprising speed. Marshal Davis, armed with the evidence from Pine Creek, obtained a warrant to search Western Pacific's offices in Laramie. There they discovered documents directly linking Reynolds to the tax fraud that had deprived Maeve of her land, including a damning letter instructing an employee to intercept and destroy mail from Jonathan Blackwood. Faced with multiple federal charges, Reynolds' carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Business partners distanced themselves, the railroad suspended negotiations, and his political allies suddenly became scarce. When Marshal Davis arrived at Reynolds' home to arrest him, they found he had fled, taking what valuables he could carry. "He won't get far," Davis assured Maeve when he came to Whispering Pines with news of these developments. "We have alerts out in Denver, San Francisco, even back east. Men like Reynolds always think they're smarter than everyone else. That's usually their downfall." More important to Maeve than Reynolds' fate was the judge's decision. With the tax fraud proven and the illegal sale invalidated, the Blackwood land was returned to her ownership. The fire damage complicated its value, but timber companies were already expressing interest in harvesting the burned trees, which remained usable if processed quickly. "You could sell it," Xander suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Take the money and go anywhere you want. Start fresh without all these painful memories." Maeve considered this. "Is that what you think I should do?" There was a hesitation before he answered. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy." "And if what makes me happy is staying in Wyoming?" she asked quietly. Xander turned to face her fully, his expression vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. "Is it? After everything that's happened?" In answer, Maeve reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "I came west looking for independence, for a place to belong. I found both, just not exactly where I expected." She met his gaze steadily. "I found them here, with you." The joy that transformed Xander's face in that moment was something Maeve knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He drew her closer, his hand gentle against her cheek. "I love you, Maeve Blackwood. I think I have since you stood in my kitchen clutching a rock as a weapon, too proud to admit you were terrified." She laughed softly. "I was terrified. Of so many things. But not anymore." Her eyes held his, unflinching. "I love you too, Xander. More than I thought possible." His kiss was tender, unhurried, so different from their desperate embrace in the creek, yet carrying the same profound connection. When they finally drew apart, Xander's expression turned serious again. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About me. About why I might not be easy to love." Maeve waited, giving him space to find his words. "After Caroline died, I closed myself off. Built walls. Decided it was safer not to care too deeply about anyone or anything except the ranch." He looked down at their joined hands. "I'm not sure I know how to be open anymore. How to be the kind of man who can give you what you deserve. I'm not exactly an expert at this either," Maeve reminded him gently. "I've spent my whole life trying to meet others' expectations, my father's, Boston society's. Learning to be myself, to trust my own heart. It's new territory." She squeezed his hand. "Maybe that's what we can give each other, the patience to learn together, to figure out who we are now and who we want to become. I'm hard to love," she added with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Stubborn, opinionated, too independent for my own good, at least that's what my aunt always said." Xander's lips curved into a smile that reached his eyes, warming them to the color of summer rain. "Good," he said simply. "I like a challenge worth fighting for." The words settled between them like a promise not of perfection, but of effort. Of commitment to something they both recognized as rare and worth protecting. In the weeks that followed, as autumn painted the landscape in gold and crimson, Maeve and Xander began building a life together. The legal aftermath of Reynolds' crimes continued to unfold, with the fugitive finally captured in San Francisco as he attempted to book passage to Australia. The territorial courts were methodically unwinding his fraudulent business dealings, returning stolen properties to their rightful owners and bringing co-conspirators to justice. At Pine Creek, nature was already beginning its work of renewal. The first rains after the fire had washed ash into the soil, and pioneering plants were sprouting in the blackened earth. Maeve visited regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with Xander, planning how to restore and develop the land in a way that honored both its natural beauty and her father's vision. "We could build here," Xander suggested during one such visit, standing on a ridge overlooking the creek. "Not immediately, but eventually. A second home, perhaps. Somewhere to stay when we're working this part of the valley." "We?" Maeve asked, her heart quickening at the casual inclusion. Xander turned to her, suddenly looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that." He took her hands in his. "Maeve Blackwood, I know we haven't had the most conventional courtship. We've faced fire and bullets and legal battles instead of dances and dinner parties. I prefer our way," she assured him, sensing where this was leading and hardly daring to breathe. "So do I." He smiled briefly, then grew serious again. "I can't promise you an easy life. The West demands hard work, endurance, the ability to face setbacks without surrender. But I can promise you a partner who will stand beside you through whatever comes, who will respect your strength and independence even as he tries to protect you, who will love you with everything he has for as long as he lives." From his pocket he drew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it. As my wife." Maeve looked from the ring to Xander's face, beloved now, every line and plain familiar to her heart. "Yes," she said simply, joyfully. "Yes, I will marry you, Xander Caldwell." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added with a teasing smile, "Even though you're hard to love, sometimes stubborn, overprotective, too independent for your own good." He laughed, drawing her into his arms. "Good thing we both like challenges worth fighting for." Their wedding took place on Christmas Day, 1875, in the parlor at Whispering Pines. Judge Hammond himself performed the ceremony, with Floyd, Cooper, and the other ranch hands in attendance, along with friends from Laramie and a few of Xander's relatives who had traveled from the east for the occasion. Maeve wore a gown of deep blue velvet, not the traditional white of Boston weddings, but a color that matched her eyes and suited the woman she had become. Xander watched her approach with an expression of such naked love that she felt her heart might burst with happiness. Their vows were simple, personal, spoken with the straightforward honesty that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. No flowery promises, just a clear-eyed commitment to face whatever life brought together, with courage and faith in each other. "I never expected to find you," Xander told her as they stood before the judge. "After Caroline, I thought that part of my life was over. You taught me that the heart can heal, can grow, can love again, perhaps even more deeply for having known loss. You showed me what true strength looks like," Maeve responded, her voice steady despite the tears shimmering in her eyes. "Not independence alone, but the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to build something lasting with another person. I promise to continue being strong for you, with you, because of you all the days of our life together." As Judge Hammond pronounced them husband and wife, snow began to fall outside the windows, large, gentle flakes drifting down from a pewter sky, covering the land in pristine white. It seemed fitting somehow, this clean slate offered by nature on the day they began their life together. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing and more laughter than the old ranch house had heard in years. When the last guests had departed or settled into spare rooms for the night, Xander led Maeve to the master bedroom, their bedroom now, transformed by Floyd and the other hands while they had been occupied with the ceremony. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a new quilt covered the bed, and a small fire crackled in the fireplace, casting warm light over the simple furnishings. On the bedside table stood a vase containing pine branches and dried wildflowers, a reminder of both their lands, joined now as they were. "Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell," Xander said softly, drawing her into his arms. "Home," Maeve repeated, savoring the word and all it represented, not just a place, but a belonging, a certainty, a love strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. As the snow continued to fall outside their window, blanketing the ranch in hushed white, they began the first night of their married life, two people who had found in each other not just companionship or passion, but a true partnership of equals, forged in fire and sealed with promises neither made lightly. Spring came early to Wyoming territory in 1876, bringing rapid renewal to the scorched lands of Pine Creek Valley. Where blackened stumps had dominated the landscape, tender green shoots now emerged, reaching for the sun with the same determination Maeve had shown in reclaiming her inheritance. The legal aftermath of Reynolds' crimes continued to unfold. He had been convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison, a victory for justice that brought Maeve satisfaction, if not joy. Too many lives had been damaged by his greed for her to take pleasure in his downfall. With the coal deposits on her land now legally documented, Maeve had negotiated a limited mining agreement that would provide steady income while preserving the valley's natural beauty. The railroad had revised its plans, proposing a spur line that would serve the mine without dominating the landscape. "You've become quite the businesswoman," Xander remarked one April morning as they rode together across Whispering Pines, checking on the new calves. "Those railroad men didn't know what hit them," Maeve laughed. "They expected a grateful, deferential female, easily overawed by their technical language and legal complexities. Their mistake. Their loss," Xander corrected, his eyes warm with pride. "And our gain." Their partnership had flourished in the months since their wedding. Xander had welcomed Maeve's input on ranch operations, valuing her organizational skills and fresh perspective. Together, they had expanded Whispering Pines' breeding program, introducing new bloodlines that promised to strengthen their herd. At Pine Creek, they had begun construction of a new cabin larger and more comfortable than the original, but still in keeping with the land's character. It would serve as a second home, allowing them to divide their time between both properties as needed. As they crested a rise overlooking a meadow dotted with wildflowers, Xander reined in his horse. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the vista before them. "Sometimes I still can't believe how fortunate we are to have all this, to have each other." Maeve smiled, a secret warming her heart. "Perhaps even more fortunate than you realize." He turned to her, a question in his eyes. "I saw Dr. Bennett yesterday, while you were meeting with the cattle buyers," she explained, suddenly nervous despite her certainty that the news would bring him joy. "I've been suspecting for a few weeks, but wanted to be sure before I told you." Understanding dawned on Xander's face, followed by a look of such wonder that Maeve felt tears spring to her eyes. "Maeve? Are you saying, we're going to have a baby?" she confirmed, her voice soft with emotion. "In late October, the doctor thinks." In one fluid motion, Xander dismounted and reached up to lift her from her saddle, his hands gentle at her waist. When her feet touched the ground, he dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach in a gesture of such reverence that Maeve's tears spilled over. "A child," he whispered, looking up at her with eyes that held both joy and a shadow of old grief. "Our child." Maeve knelt beside him in the grass, taking his face between her hands. "I know you're thinking of Caroline, of the baby you lost," she said gently. "It's all right to remember them, to honor them." Xander nodded, not attempting to hide the complexity of his emotions, one of the many gifts their relationship had given him, this freedom to be fully himself, vulnerabilities and all. "I am thinking of them," he admitted. "But also of you, of us, of this miracle we've created together." He placed his hand over hers. "I never thought I'd have this chance again. To be a father, to watch my wife grow with our child. Are you happy? Maeve asked, though his face had already given her the answer. In response, Xander pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not: gratitude, love, and a fierce, protective joy that seemed to encompass not just her and their unborn child, but the entire world they had built together. Later, as they rode back to the ranch house, Xander couldn't stop smiling. We'll need to prepare a nursery, he said, already planning. And I should start building a cradle. My father made one for me, it's tradition. Maeve laughed at his enthusiasm. We have 6 months, Xander. Plenty of time. Not nearly enough, he countered good-naturedly. There's so much to do, to think about. Will the baby have your eyes, I wonder? Your spirit, I hope. Your strength, Maeve added. Your kindness. Our stubbornness, poor child, Xander teased. Their laughter carried across the spring landscape, a sound as natural and right as the wind in the pines or the creek flowing over stones. Whatever challenges lay ahead and life in the West would always present them, they would face them together, with the resilience that had brought them through fire and loss to this moment of perfect happiness. Jonathan Xander Caldwell was born on a crisp October evening in 1876, announcing his arrival with robust cries that brought tears to his father's eyes. Maeve, exhausted but radiant, watched as Xander held their son for the first time, his hands so capable with horses and tools suddenly gentle with infinite care. He has your mouth, Xander whispered, awestruck. And I think your determination. Listen to those lungs. Per Dr. Bennett, Maeve agreed with a tired smile. Johnny made him work for his fee. Johnny, Xander repeated, testing the name they had chosen to honor Maeve's father. Welcome to the world, son. You have quite a heritage to live up to. Blackwoods and Caldwells, both known for their courage and perseverance, and their ability to find love in unexpected places, Maeve added softly. Xander's eyes met hers over their child's head, filled with a devotion that still took her breath away. The most valuable legacy of all, he agreed. As winter settled over Wyoming territory, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland, the Caldwell household adjusted to the rhythms of life with the newborn. Johnny proved to be a good-natured baby, with his mother's blue eyes and his father's determined chin. Christmas that year was especially meaningful, a celebration not just of their first wedding anniversary, but of the family they had created together. Floyd, who had appointed himself unofficial grandfather to Johnny, carved a magnificent rocking horse as a gift, for when the boy's old enough to appreciate it. Next year, he promised with a wink. They grow faster than you can imagine. As the fire crackled in the hearth and snow drifted past the windows, Maeve looked around at the gathering, not just ranch hands now, but family in all the ways that mattered. How far she had come from that terrified young woman hiding behind an overturned wagon, armed with nothing but a rock and her own determination. What are you thinking? Xander asked, coming to sit beside her with Johnny sleeping peacefully in his arms. About journeys, she replied. How the most important ones are never what we expect when we set out. He nodded, understanding as he always did. When you arrived in Wyoming, you were looking for independence, for land to call your own. And I found those things, Maeve acknowledged. But also so much more, a partnership I never knew to dream of, a love I didn't believe existed outside of novels, a family built on choice rather than obligation. Xander shifted Johnny to one arm so he could take her hand with the other. Remember what you said that first day? I'm hard to love, you warned me. Maeve smiled at the memory. And you said you liked a challenge worth fighting for. Best fight I ever took on, he assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. One I intend to keep winning every day for the rest of our lives. As they sat together in the warm circle of firelight, with their son sleeping between them and the future stretching before them like an unwritten story, Maeve knew that whatever challenges that future might hold, they would face them as they had faced all others together, with courage, with faith in each other, and with the deep, abiding love that had transformed two solitary souls into something stronger than either could have been alone. The land they had fought for would continue to shape their lives, as would the children they would raise upon it. But the most valuable territory they had claimed wasn't measured in acres or mineral rights, it was the territory of each other's hearts, a conquest won not through force but through understanding, patience, and the willingness to be vulnerable despite past wounds. "I love you, Xander Caldwell," Maeve whispered as the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing their world in pristine white, a clean page for the next chapter of their story. "And I love you, Maeve Caldwell," he replied, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who had found his true north after years of wandering. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows,